glad to have you back. An increase in debt service is one of the challenges Nigeria's fiscal performance is set to face in 2025, as the National Assembly, comprising the Senate and House of Representatives, passed the 2025 appropriation bill of 54.9 trillion naira, out of which 14.3 trillion naira was allocated to the service to service the country's debt in the fiscal year. The past budget includes 3.65 trillion naira for statutory transfer, 14.32 trillion naira for debt service, 13.06 trillion set aside for ongoing non-debt spending, and 23.9 trillion naira to be added to development fund for capital spending. Before the passage of the budget, several ministries, agencies and departments were invited by the Appropriation Committee of the legislative arm to defend their financial obligations in the previous year and how they intend to spend in the coming year. The 2025 budget framework is also approved based on the oil price benchmark of $75 per ounce. Oil production is projected to be 2.06 million barrels per day, an exchange rate of 1,400 naira to the dollar. Mr. Iniobong Usen is the head research and policy advisory with budget. He joins me to speak more around this conversation. Thank you so much, Mr. Usen. It's good to have you on the program.
Yeah, good afternoon, Tolu, and thanks for having me. How are you doing?
Very well. Let's talk about this document. And it's, to me, the revenue aspect of it. What do you make of our projections for revenue in 2025, in your understanding?
I mean, before I get to answer your question, just to state that we haven't seen the authentic Appropriation Act as signed by the president. So a lot of the analysis that we've been doing, have been based on newspaper reports, and some documents that have been flying around. So it's not authentic. And this is due to the fact that the 2025 budget process has been characterized by, a departure from established timelines that we have been able to achieve over the last 4 years, which, led to a late approval and passage of the budget. But be that as it may, with a revenue projection of 42 trillion naira as it is, it would seem that the federal government is expecting a lot if you juxtapose that with what it was able to achieve last year. So if you look at the budget implementation report for 2024, Q2, which is the most recent available, you would see that the revenue that had accrued to government within that period, I think, was around 12 trillion naira. And if you multiply that by 2, it would put it at about 24 trillion naira. So projecting a revenue of 42 trillion naira, it's almost like 100% increase from, what you must have realized in 2024, if you prorate that. But if you look at the sector that is supposed to provide a bulk of the revenue or a substantial part of the revenue, which is the oil sector, the federal government in the medium-term expenditure framework had projected a revenue of about 19 trillion naira from that sector for the 2025 fiscal year. And if you look at the fundamentals driving that revenue projection, you look at the oil production, you look at the oil price. For oil production, the federal government, projecting 2 million barrels per day. As at December, which is the last figure I saw, we're still doing about 1.5 million barrels per day for crude oil production. If you add, condensates of, a little around 200,000 barrels per day, brings it to about 1.7 million barrels per day. That is still, a substantial departure from what the projection for that would be in 2025. And if you also look at oil price, the benchmark at $75 per barrel, I watched you in an earlier session, say that Brent crude is doing $70 per barrel as we speak, meaning that at this point in time, we're already doing $5 below the price for crude, which would also have a significant impact on expected revenues from crude oil. But if you look at the non-oil sector, vis-a-vis the fiscal reforms that are currently in play, we would expect that with regards to CIT, PIT, and other non-oil revenue sources, that if the 4 reform bills are, passed into law, and implementation begins in earnest, that would, give the FIRS a little bit more reach with regards to collecting revenues across board, which would plug a lot of leakages. I do expect that there would be, a significant leap in non-oil revenues. But it's important that government invests in a lot of these sectors that would drive, the revenue. As you know, with the business environment, there's still a lot of challenges with regards to a lot of the components that make up the ease of doing business. So if you look at infrastructure, for instance, power, road, digital infrastructure, there's still a lot of gap that government needs to address. And so that's why it's important that we need to be very, 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 very circumspect with, the resource allocation process. With the figures I've seen or the document I've seen flying around, it doesn't suggest that there's a departure from what has happened in the past. It would even seem that, these or the National Assembly has been more emboldened to, allocate resources in a manner that I do not think is efficient enough to deliver economic growth. For in one of the ministries, for instance, you could see clearly where the insertions had happened because the funds, were bigger than the initial funds that came with the proposed budget. And for an agency like the OG Cooperative or the one of those agencies under the Ministry of Agri, we saw a quantum leap, of almost 300 billion from the proposed budget to the approved budget. If you juxtapose that also with the budget of the Federal Ministry of Agri and Food Security, there's only a difference of about 20 billion. And if you look at the nature of those insertions, they come in the nature of, what we would consider constituency projects. So if we are to achieve these revenue projections that we have, projected for ourselves in 2025 full year, it's important that, the federal government allocate resources and, prioritize those resources in areas that would, stimulate economic growth and improve the business environment for private sector to drive this growth.
The revenue target projection is about 36.35 trillion for 2025. Well, according to the documents that we've seen made available to us. But my question to you really would be effective tax collection and restructuring revenue agencies. Optimizing expenditure is what some analysts have said will be the way to go. Do you think that we're ready to go this route? And another question, it's a two-in-one question so that we manage time very well. The likes of the customs that will have a, trying to increase revenue and all of that. When we talk of trade facilitation on the other side, how do we balance all of this together so that we are not hurting our exporters and importers when we're trying to make money for government?
So if you followed the public hearing on the 4 tax reform bills,
yes,
you would know that it was a major issue that the CG Customs had put forward, removing that revenue collection function, of customs and making them focus solely on trade facilitation. If you look at examples, even very close to our shores, Ghana, for instance, the customs is, a paramilitary arm under the revenue service. In Kenya, it's the same thing. And the reason for this is so that customs that is supposed to facilitate trade is not an impediment to trade facilitation, which is what we have seen, in different borders, across the federation. So it's important that that revenue function is transferred to the FIRS so that, customs can focus solely on facilitating trade and ensuring that, our exports are competitive anywhere across the world. For other revenue collecting agencies, it's also important that the Orosanye report is implemented. A lot of, hula baloo was done around this last year, but very little has been seen with regards to implementation. Now, I also listened keenly to your previous guest with regards to some of the impediments with regards to regulation, for businesses. And this is because a lot of, government agencies that were set up, to regulate, to facilitate or support, the business environment have pivoted now to activities solely focused on revenue collection. And a lot of these activities, in a lot of instances, serve as impediments or stumbling blocks to businesses, because it becomes almost impossible for you to maybe attain one certificate or to, attain one service to, move your business forward. And so we do hope that the federal government, led by President Tinubu, would go back to that Oronsoye report or the updated report as the case may be, and look at those agencies that should not have revenue collection function. Because like I had said in an earlier, program, I think it was your program, there are series of bills sitting before the National Assembly, for the amendment of the bills setting up a number of agencies currently in existence, seeking to introduce one levy or the other, that agency would collect and retain part of it and remit to the local government. And if you followed also the public hearing on tax reform bills, you would realize that for a number of the government agencies that came to present their positions on the bill, a number of issues they had raised had focused on removing their revenue collection function or removing certain activities that would require them to collect some fee, right? And placing that either in the FIRS or completely scrapping those functions. And so this just gives you a sense of, how introducing revenue collection functions to agencies that should be facilitating economic activities or facilitating trade, as the case may be, or regulating the business environment to ensure that there's a level playing field for all the market participants to play equitably, have moved to, revenue generation, as the case may be. But that needs to stop if, the key policy thrusts of this Tinubu administration would be achieved.
Well, when we look at it, many would say borrowing might be inevitable. But if we even are to borrow, what do you think should be the focus? And what sort of borrowing are you thinking that government, or what sort of borrowing would you advise government to get into? Some say we must domesticate our borrowings this time. How does that also come to you?
So my problem with borrowing in Nigeria over time, and I stand with the viewpoint that borrowing is never a bad thing, whether for business or government. But in the Nigerian case, the problem with our borrowing has always been that we've not been able to rationalize it, and then we've not been able to, sort of utilize it effectively. If you look at the borrowings that have happened over the last couple of years, you would see that Nigerians have not attained value for money. And I'll pick just one example. If you look at the state-owned oil company, the NNPC, and the resource-backed lending that it has gone on, over the last 5-6 years, whether it's from Project Eagle or to Project Gazelle, for the turnaround maintenance of 4 refineries, very little, in terms of value for money has been attained. You still have, accusations of, those refineries not working or being an extension of the blending plants that were discovered in Malta. And the noise has died down around, what the Port Harcourt refinery, since it came on stream, has been able to refine and, let out into the market. We've seen also a lot of news articles around the continuous importation of petroleum products to compete with the Dangote refinery. And so this is a clear testament to the fact that utilization of loans, previously, have not, led to value for money, as the case may be. And if you also look at utilization of loans also on public infrastructure, a lot of the roads across the length and breadth of this federation were, constructed with loans. But for a lot of those roads, 1-2 years after those roads have been constructed, for roads that should have lasted for a minimum of 10 years before you begin the maintenance of those roads have gone bad. Whether it's with the East-West road in the Niger Delta region, or a number of roads across the Northwest or the Southwest, as the case may be, you would see that a lot of these loans, even before the country had begun to repay those loans, because there's usually a moratorium period for the loans we got from bilateral or multilateral institutions, that those roads went bad even before we began to pay those loans. So for me, the question is not about borrowing, but it's for ensuring that the loans we borrow are invested in sectors or activities that have the capacity to pay back those loans over a long period of time. And the projects, the activities, the programs that these loans are invested in are sustainable.
Well, it's a big one. For me also, budget implementing the document to the latter is something that we also talk about. Like some would say, Nigeria is always having policies, but at times implementing them is what many are worried about. So when you also talk about our budget and our budgetary spending plan, what do you make of our level of implementation before now? Sometimes 70%, 75%, 80%. Yeah, take it away. What do you make of that?
Implementation has been very chaotic. I mean, in the last 3-4 years, this is a legacy issue that we need to, seriously address. As you know, currently, we're implementing the 2024 budget and equally the recurrent expenditure for the 2025 budget. There was also a rollover of the 2023 budget, the implementation of that budget in the 2024 fiscal year. And some of those activities in 2023, right, were rolled over to be implemented in 2025. And this goes against one of the core principles of budgeting, which is that it should have a specific and clear start and stop date.
Yeah.
So this current practice of moving from the January to December calendar year to now January to January, December, 2 years, something that's supposed to be an annual budget, implementing it over 2 years is problematic. Reason being that the revenue that was projected, this 42 trillion naira revenue projected, as found in the statement or the budget approved by the National Assembly, is meant to be implemented, is meant to be used to implement the 2025 budget. But in a situation where the 2024 budget has been, the implementation of the 2023 budget and the 2024 budget has been rolled over into 2025, what now happens is that the activities or the budget lines, that were in the 2023 budget, 2024 budget, and 2025 budget would be competing for the same resources, this same 42 trillion naira. So when the implementation figures are released, you do not know whether it's implementation for the 3 budgets that are currently being implemented, put together, or is implementation for the 2024 or 2025 budget, as the case may be. So it's important that we clean up the process and ensure that we go back to that January, December, our budget calendar, where one budget, the enactment of one budget would retire the implementation of a previous budget. So any budget or any budget line that did not receive funding in that particular fiscal year can be rolled over into the next year's budget. In fact, it would be the first set of budget lines that these MDAs can put forward, when they are putting together their budgets to submit to the budget office. Without that, there's going to be a lot of confusion around the prioritization of resources and how resources are spent across several budgets that are implemented simultaneously.
I must thank you so much. Iniobong Usen is a head research and policy advisory with Budget. Thank you so much for your analysis regards the 2025 budget and, of course, expected implementation plans. Do enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tolu, for having me, and have a lovely day.
All right, then. Thank you for your brilliant